am the Executive Director of Communications and Community Relations for the district. And thank you for being with us, especially early on a Saturday morning. We want to acknowledge that we have board member Brian Jensen here with us. We may have other board members who are joining us as well. Our superintendent and cabinet leaders are here today as well, and our Director of Boundaries and Planning, Brian Conley, who will be kicking off the meeting. I wanted to just walk you through some business items. So first off, if you're looking for a restroom, go out these doors and into the main office of the school. Hang a left in the back, and you'll see 2 bathrooms there that are open. If you are thinking of questions as you're listening to the presentation, there are question cards here at the front and also at that table in the back, as well as pens. Write those down. We'll gather those for the Q&A after the presentation is done. And if anybody is looking for childcare, that is down that back right hallway in room 1070. So if you have a need for that, or other folks come in, that's where that is located. As Brian mentioned, we do have a live stream on YouTube going on right now, and we are also doing this in Spanish. So thank you so much for understanding the need for the setup with technology today. I'm going to turn the time now to Brian Conley, our Director of Boundaries and Planning. He's going to go through for a presentation. After that, he'll give the mic back to me, and I'll explain how we'll do Q&A today. Thank you.
While we're getting the projector turned on, the reason that I'm going to be right here is part of the YouTube thing. So that's why it's probably going to look a little more grand than it's meant to look. But Sam assures me that on YouTube, that's the way it needs to be. So we'll get started here soon. And thank you, Yandria, for starting. We'd like to thank all of you, first of all, for being here this morning. I'm Brian Conley, the Boundaries and Planning Director. And as all of you that are here know, or as you're learning as this fall really gets into high gear with school, is we're trying to make recommendations, and ultimately board will be making some decisions on school closure possibilities as well as boundary readjustments. So the first 20 minutes or so is going to be some background information, so we all have a common understanding of some of the why and what we've done and where we're going. And then we are going to open it up to the questions that you all write down. Even if it isn't a question that you're writing down, if you want to write down a comment, we will read those comments as well. Having them written down helps us keep things organized and also focus some frequently asked questions on our website later based on what we're seeing multiples of. So please, as I'm presenting, it gives you a good 20 minutes, 25 minutes to write down questions, and you're not limited to just one card. Just wanted to let you know that. But we do want just one comment or one question per card as you write them. So as we get started here, the why really becomes the real focal point of what's happening in our district this school year and next school year. And it starts with what you see on this slide here. What is our reach? We want to do this work because we think we can most importantly, most of all, serve our 20,000 students better in our district. About 9,500 of those students are elementary students. First and foremost, we have a commitment to do our best for those 9,500 elementary students. We also wanted to put this slide up, let you know, yep, our city is growing, but our number of under 18-year-olds is shrinking proportionately. And as you read down through this, the challenge through all this is keeping students first and foremost, all 9,500 of our elementary students front and center, not any one pocket here and there, but all of them. And also, we have a very broad responsibility to our tax base. And so some of you, if you're here as a parent, as a community member, you may just be here as a resident of Salt Lake City and a taxpayer. We know that we have that really broad responsibility to everybody that's here in Salt Lake City. This map from the US Census shows that Salt Lake City, along with Park City, are the only two districts where the number of 18-year-olds and younger, the only two places where the percentage of those people is under 20%. Even Murray has a few more percentage-wise under 18-year-olds than we do. This map 30 years ago would have looked a lot different than it does now. The darker shaded in areas are communities where that percentage of 18-year-olds and younger is higher than here. So that gives you kind of the big view of our valley and right up into the Park City area as well. We know over time that our population has fluctuated over the last 75 years. We gained some. We were up over 40,000 students at one point in Salt Lake City. We've dropped since then. And one thing that this really points out is that we've gone through and had to make difficult decisions and try to figure things out at different points in our time. Chances are most of us weren't around. Some of you may have been between 1963 and 1979 when that big drop happened. But for a lot of us, this feels pretty new, but in fact it really isn't. In the past, and when we look more closely at that 15-year period, we notice that a lot of schools did close during that time. What was their process? We don't know 100% what the process was, but we do know that they closed. And I think one of the things that has made this a little bit more of a feeling of, whoa, what's going on, is that they probably didn't feel as much then, is because for a 15-year period, 32 schools closed, but then we hit when South High closed in 1988, and there was a 14-year gap before the next school was closed. And then Roslyn Heights and Lowell were closed then, and then another 21-year gap until our Salt Lake Virtual School earlier this year was closed. So it feels different because we've had bigger chunks of time where it wasn't happening. So again, our focus is on elementary. The data you saw before was K-12. This is for our elementary. Our enrollment has really dropped over the last 8 years. And there's a number of reasons for that. And anybody who's lived in Salt Lake City for the last 10, 15 years, you know some of those reasons already. We can go into more detail if that's where any of our questions take us, but we've really talked a lot about this being the impetus of why we need to further study the schools that we're further studying. What we really aim to do in this process is to maintain and strengthen our high quality learning environments for students. We think it is strong in some areas. We think it can get stronger in others. We want to be student focused first and foremost, and we need those opportunities to do that with our schools being more robust with our neighborhood populations. We do want to be fiscally responsible. That speaks to number 2 there. And what I also just alluded to, we want to establish school boundaries that support thriving neighborhood schools and experiences for our student population at every one of our elementary schools. That's our goal. That's what we're shooting for. We think we can make a nice stride forward in doing that with the tough decisions and changes that are going to be happening over the next year or so. Our elementary schools will be a better place overall for within school choices that parents have, that students have. They're going to provide better collaboration structures for teachers. Then some of our schools are already there. Some we can really improve that on. Special programs in our district, we want access to those. And that access to special programs means not just for some in one area of town and not as much in other areas of town. We want that for access and opportunity for all of our students. We want to minimize our split classes. And we want to, of course, become more efficient and effective with our financial resources. Our previous actions included looking at these considerations. They are alphabetized, and saying, let's look at our 27 elementary schools and really talk and learn more and take these into consideration for saying which schools do we need to further study. And through that process, brought to the board after evaluating data and looking at a lot of community feedback. We want more of that. Thank you for those of you that have already provided some. If you want to provide more, it's part of what we're doing today. This is a big piece of it. Another part is what you can fill out online. We have comment and question cards in our schools' offices that you can also get help from our school administrators or office personnel to do this if you want to leave some comments or questions as well. We are trying to take a real holistic assessment of schools. This isn't just about taking a bunch of numbers and mathematically figuring it out, because that takes out the human element piece of it. At the same time, the human element piece of it alone isn't the whole reason why we're going to make decisions. It's integrating those two. It's taking that community feedback and being able to really sift through and say, where does that help us get more information? And it's also taking the numbers and saying, here's what our numbers are telling us as well. Our deeper discussions, some of the talk was about what do we have already in some of our schools. Like some of our schools have community learning centers. And we saw a real huge value in fact, this campus right here, the Glendale Mountain View campus with the Glendale Community Learning Center, is a good example of ones that really have a reach that's further than just the school in that community. We did look at building age capacity and also the learning environment conditions. Enrollment was a piece of that as well, school enrollment. In our neighborhood classes, and we really focused a lot on neighborhood classes because district programs at a school can be moved from one school to another if they need to be. It's not something we want to be doing every other year or every third year or anything like that, but we do want to be able to have that option of being able to move those to better give access and opportunity to our students if need be. Our neighborhood student populations, we had some look on that, and we looked at the safety features of things like major thoroughfares as well. So a lot of this work was done, that we've done since the Boundary Options Committee after July, really as we did the further study, helped us dig into some of that, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So we took the considerations that are in policy G5, that's what that G5 is up there. We took the policy and we saw that really there were 5 primary categories that represent the principles that are going to really guide the development of recommendations to the board. We are continuing to compile and evaluate additional data. We have a real, the data source of our October 1 counts. We're now just getting organized and compiled because here we are in early October, so we have some more information that over the next couple weeks you'll hear more about. We're looking at when we recommend a school for closure, what does that do to boundary configurations? And ultimately, again, we're trying to take that holistic approach to determine which schools we recommend for closure. We want to balance the needs across the district to best serve our students. Those 5 categories mentioned on the previous slide are student enrollment and residential population, proximity and availability of neighborhood schools, building and learning environment quality, strategic placement of district-wide programs for equitable access, and community input and stakeholder feedback. And under each one of those categories, you'll see the first one, student enrollment, right there in residential population. You see that's category 1 here. Here's some of the more in-depth data we're collecting that we're actually, you'll see when we get to a later slide of where you can actually start looking at what we're collecting as we get it, and as we organize it, we're able to start sharing that out. Things like number of students who live within a 1-mile radius of our elementary schools, things like our 3-year cohort survival rate for each grade, meaning how many of 4th graders at a school, those same 4th graders turn around and are 5th graders at the school that next year, and we're looking at it for the 3-year chunk of time. Those numbers are going to be coming out soon as well, now that we have our October 1 counts that we're starting to work with. Category 2 talked about these. And sometimes when we're collecting this information, it is as easy as, yep, here's the number. Here's how many students are enrolled. Here's how many neighborhood students. Sometimes it's just a hard number. Sometimes it gets a little bit more narrative and anecdotal about anticipating possible transportation needs, looking at walkable alternatives. Things like that is more about the discussion and coming to some sort of mutual understanding and agreements as well. Here's more from category 2. So you can see where we've been talking with city people about what kind of zoning laws have been happening over the last 20 years since we went through this process before. What about local traffic patterns in certain areas where we've grown as a city? How has that affected us? And then we do think a lot and talk a lot and gather input a lot on community and neighborhood identity. And we know that community and neighborhood identity shifts when new people move in and out. It also shifts when there's boundary changes. So the community you're living in right now, for those of you, I think back to 20 years ago, in the greater Glendale neighborhood, the community looks different now than it did 20 years ago when I was doing some work with then Principal John Urlacher over at Mountain View Elementary. Looks a little bit different now than it did then, and those kind of things change. So that's why this input is important. That's why the work that we're doing is trying to take that holistic view. Category 3 was about building and learning environment and quality, and you can see what it is that we're trying to dig into the numbers there about. Things like the current physical condition and capacity of the building and site. This one down here, some people have asked questions about in the past, facility needs of any school becoming or remaining a hub school. Hub is a acronym, it's part of that education talk, and it's we have a few schools in our district where we, for students with our special education program that are bused into our some schools, and we have more students in some schools than we do in others that have special needs that we're addressing through those hub school sites. Here's more on category 3. By the way, this presentation will also be up on the district website. We'll show you where you can get that. Category 4, things like what's it going to look like for staffing needs, and for if one of the schools that has ELP in it were to be one of the schools that the board says, yeah, we'll close this school or that school. We got to look at what staffing needs, facilities, the path assurance is given on the movement of a district program. So we'll be looking at those for our dual language immersion schools if one of those is effective, ELP hub, and special facilities for special programs. Sometimes we have to, as we dig into those numbers, what kind of talks and considerations do we have to make if that changes in a school and that those services need to be provided elsewhere. Category 5 is really about why we're here today. As an example, we've had site meetings. We have these information meetings here. We'll have, and I'll show you the information coming up, some board comment periods, and not at the current board office, these board hearing. Those coming up in November and December are going to be at locations around our district. We'll get to those. So, boundary adjustments, if schools close, are going to happen. And obviously, closing 3 schools accounts for different boundary adjustments than if 6 schools close. You're going to have more adjustments depending on the number of schools. And so these are the considerations. These are the considerations we're looking at for those. Really important, we actually started earlier this month with conversations with our principals about scheduling more school community council meetings for the spring, getting more improvement council meetings set up with their staff so that when this transition time comes that involves boundary changes, then we really have ourselves ready to go for the transition, because the decisions that have to be made are very difficult right now. What doesn't have to be near as difficult, but much more proactive, and also can be big wins for us, is how well we transition. How well our adults, not only in our buildings, but in our communities, really embrace and try to find solutions to obstacles and try to overcome those obstacles with new opportunities. Here's some more of the considerations on boundary changes as we're looking at those. And our next steps for further study, part of the current work that we're doing is we have a data group and a transition group, and pretty loosely defined because it depends on what data we're trying to collect to tell us what who's really focused in that group. Sometimes, like right now, our information systems is really buried in the new October student enrollment counts. So those are the official numbers that go to the state, making sure we have those airtight so that we can start building out scenarios, possibilities anyway, from what we find from those numbers. So a lot more work right now, say with information systems, transportation, and then at other times it's about collecting data and really working with teaching and learning department, and if an ELP program ends up moving, or if a dual language immersion program ends up moving, those kind of things. So these are different people at different times. It isn't one set group of 10 or 15 all meeting at the same time. It's situational for both the transition group and the data group. And the transition group piece is already well underway to saying we got to get some pieces ready so that when decisions are made, we're ready to throw the transition piece into high gear. When you go to our district website, it's what you'll see on the left. And when you click on that red button, learn more about the process, it brings up what you see on the right side. You'll see frequently asked questions that have been organized better than they have in the past. We got some great feedback from community members about trying to find that. So we've done, I think we're getting better at our frequently asked questions organization. District data. You might click on the district maps, and I can't do this on a PowerPoint. This is a static version of what you'd be able to do. But there is an interactive map under there that shows you all of our elementary schools And you can zoom in and out on this map. So right like this, you go, no, that's way too busy for me to want to look at. Go look at it on your computer. A lot easier than looking at it on your phone, I'll tell you. Or come use a school computer, we can get you set up to do that. And you can zoom in and out and look right at any one of those schools and areas and take a look at what those numbers look like. And we're going to have the new October numbers populating this in the very near future, in the next 2-3 weeks, instead of looking at the old October 2022 numbers, which is what we had, what we have right now. We're getting that new information, and that'll help you be able to look at real time what's happening right now. We do have information meetings coming up. Of course, there's number 1 we've already done. We're on number 2 here, but coming up is October 18th, October 21st, and October 25th at these sites, Northwest, Franklin. That one, the one at Franklin, will be primarily conducted in Spanish. And we also have one at Hillside Middle School. As you can see, we tried to pick Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Saturdays. We didn't try to do them all on the same day at the same time on all of them, because we learned some things from the spring that said people wanted them spread out at different times. And we will have language translation and childcare at those meetings as well. So our timeline, we've gone through what you see up here. This process started a little over a year ago. And this population and boundary study timeline is also on our district website, but we're into now this next page. And we've done July, we've done August, and we're in this part right now of September, October, which is, we are at information sessions in September and October, and then we're gathering your public comments today as an example. We also have 2 public comment periods coming up in November. Those will be back here at Glendale Middle School on the 7th and November 20th at East High. And then the public hearing before the board makes any decisions is going to be Tuesday, December 5th at West High School. Again, these dates and times are posted on website. You can always, if you can't find it on the website, please talk to your school administrator and they can sure help you with that as well. And for the time that we have left with our comments and questions, we're going to start picking those up so we can start organizing them a little. Sometimes we see 2 or 3 questions regarding the same piece. Yandri, who's picking up comments and questions here? And we have some representatives from the district that are also available here, so that when we get those questions, we found out from the first meeting, some of you want more granular information than what I myself had. So we have people from different departments here, teaching and learning, ed equity, auxiliary services. We have some of our directors. I appreciate all of you being here. Directors here, as well as anybody who might be able to more succinctly answer questions that you might have. So we'll get those organized. We'll have in fact, do you want to just read the questions on that microphone, and then I can hand the microphone to whoever needs it?
Yes, I'm going to borrow this for a minute. So, sorry, my badge is stuck here. Oh, there we go. Okay, so apologies, we were settling some translation things in the back. So I missed if you already went through the process for Q&A. I think you just did that, right? Okay.
Yeah, you probably say it a whole lot better than I do, but okay. Yeah, write your question or comment down, come submit it,
yes,
and
okay.
Then you will find the right person to answer the question or help us find the right person to answer it so we can try to do that.
Perfect. If you have questions later on, we'll keep this basket up front. Feel free to just come drop it in there. También quería comunicar en español el proceso para las preguntas. I know we're having a little bit of issue with our YouTube Spanish feed, so I'm just going to share a bit in Spanish for a minute. Vamos a tomar preguntas de los que estén aquí hoy día. Pueden llenar el formulario. Hay formularios aquí en esta mesa, hay formularios atrás, y vamos a contestar las preguntas de la comunidad. Gracias por estar con nosotros. So we'll go ahead and give people a minute to finish filling out cards. I see a few of you still with your pens, and then we'll do the basket again, and we'll get started in just a minute. Thank you. Okay, I think we're good to go ahead and get started. So I'll read off the question. I will come to the front. Thank you, Brian, for the reminder. Okay, so our first question, how are the schools that stay open going to be strengthened? For example, teacher resources, tech, and programs.
Dr. Hall, I know I saw here. Yeah. I'm going to let you go ahead and answer some of that. Can you read the question one more time there?
Yes, the question is, how are the schools that stay open going to be strengthened? For example, teacher resources, tech, and programs.
Sure, that's a great question, and it's one of the things that we've really been considering as we look at what right sizing is. I'm so sorry, I'm Dr. Tiffany Hall. I'm the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning. So our district is a one-to-one district, which means all of our students have access to a computer at school. That won't change with this. We will continue to be able to support that in every one of our schools. So when we think about technology, that would be probably how I would answer that one. In other ways that we would be strengthening schools, one of the things that we have talked a lot about is having multiple grades or classrooms at each grade is really a way that we can help students and families be able to have choice and make choice. So if we have a school that, for instance, only has one 5th grade or one 6th grade class, that can be really difficult if a student or family wants to move to another classroom or have a different teacher or different students around their child in the classroom. So one of those first things is really about making sure that we have enough classrooms at every grade level that students have choice and families have choice about where their student is. This also increases teachers' ability to individualize and customize the learning that's happening in the classroom. Many teachers at grade levels, they all plan together, plan their instruction, plan to be able to meet students' needs, especially if they have unfinished learning or if they have the need to accelerate or to do something else. And those teachers can work together and say, I'll take the students who scored this on the test and you take the students who scored this. And that way we can combine our students and really make that a effective learning experience for them. Another thing it can do is help us when we have special programs or special opportunities for students, like field trips. Many of our schools, for instance, and this is just one example, participate in a program, a STEM program that revolves around engineering with Hill Air Force Base. But they have a minimum number of students that have to be at a school to participate in that field trip because they need to have a certain number of students that come every time. So making sure that we had, say, enough 5th graders at any given school to be able to participate that would be one of the ways that we would use this opportunity to create more experiences and learning opportunities for students to participate. Is that, I hope that answered the question, and I know that there will be a lot of other ways that we'll be able to consider that and make that a piece. It is our district prerogative to make sure that every student has an excellent learning seat.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. Brian touched slightly on this in the presentation, but right now, the work that's being done, district leadership is split up into a couple of teams. There is one team entirely dedicated to transition planning. So those are some of the things we are looking at, because we know that the changes that are coming will impact a lot of families. We want to make sure we have things in place to help ease those transitions and to really achieve that goal of having broader access to opportunities for our students.
One thing I'd like to add, and thank you, Dr. Hall, for explaining that a lot. That was a great explanation. We have in our district, we have at every one of our schools something called land trust funds. I'll use that one as an example. We have a Title I school that receives $27,000 a year in land trust funds. We have another Title I school that receives $80,000. You can dang near pay for a teacher, all their benefits, all their everything with $80,000 that you couldn't touch with a school that only got $26,000. When you get an extra teacher at your school, you might have a bulge of third graders and say, let's use that extra teacher in third grade, so instead of class sizes of 27, 28, we can have our class sizes down around 20 instead, 19, 20. That's an example. Now, land trust funds is decided by school community council. Maybe that you use it in arts programs. Maybe you use it to pay for paraprofessionals. There's different ways that schools decide to use it, but that option isn't even open for our really small schools. You just have more limits on what you can actually do with it if you don't have a robust enough population of our of our neighborhood students.
Before I read the next question, I'm going to welcome our board president, Nate Salazar, who joined us. Thanks for being here. And then I'm also going to have our cabinet leaders stand up so you see who our district leadership is and what areas they oversee. So cabinet includes me. I oversee communications and community relations. And then we'll start here with Isaac. I'm going to give you the mic and just introduce yourself and your area.
Isaac Astle, Auxiliary Services. We're over physical facilities, construction management, custodial, special event reservations. That's about it.
Christina Kendall, I'm General Counsel.
Alan Kersley, Business Administrator over the finances.
Sandra Buendia, Executive Director over Educational Equity and Student Support.
You met me, Tiffany Hall, Teaching and Learning.
Leeson Taylor, Chief of Schools. We do the day-to-day operation. We have an area director for secondary, Emily Sutherland. She tried to hide it. We got her.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure folks knew what areas of expertise we have today. We do have one additional member of cabinet who is out of town today over human resource services, but will join us at future meetings. Okay, this next card has 3 questions on it, so I'll read the 3 and then we'll tackle it together. How is equity being considered? Do you have architects looking at the schools? Are there partnerships with district and Olympics? I'll touch a little bit on this, and then I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Buendia, who is over equity and student support. But equity is a term that can mean a lot of different things to people. One way in which we're looking at equity throughout this process is looking at where our special programs, district special programs are located. Programs like our Magnet ELP, our programs for gifted students, our dual language immersion programs, they are concentrated in certain parts of the city where it's difficult for kids who live in other parts of Salt Lake City to get to. We want to make sure there's a lot broader access. Our job is to serve all students in Salt Lake City and to make sure that no matter where they live in the city, that they have access to these enrichment opportunities. I'll pass it on to Dr. Buendia, who can talk a little bit more.
I feel like Yandere has answered it, and so my only addition would be that we consider access equity. So when we're talking about, and Brian Connolly mentioned a school that has a student population under 200, right? they're not going to have the same access to services, programs, enrichment opportunities as a school that has a population of 400 to 500, and you have greater resources just by the very nature. If you think about it, it's the per pupil spending per student is going to offer many opportunities. And so that's part of the equity piece, is making sure that all of our students, regardless of where they live, whichever school they attend, they have equal opportunity and equal access to rigorous, grade level, meaningful, highly engaging instruction by highly qualified teachers. They have equal access to educational or enrichment opportunities, field trips. The story real quick that I give, my grandson who attended Uinta got to go early on to ski lessons every Friday. That's not available to a lot of schools. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to address. Your zip code should not dictate the kind of experiences you have as a family or a student. It should really be everybody having equal access to all of those opportunities.
Thank you. One more piece I'll add is that looking at equity also means making sure that our students with disabilities have access to these academic opportunities as well. And part of the challenge there is in the physical limitations of some of our buildings. All of our buildings do meet compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, but because of when that act was passed, and the fact that we are the oldest school district in the state, if you were to look at some of our buildings through 2023 standards, some of our schools wouldn't meet that regulation. And so looking at that is also part of what we're talking about when we're looking at equity. Anyone? Okay, all right. Okay, I'll move on to, oh, I'm sorry, there were two more questions. Yeah. Yeah.
A quick follow-up to that is how much maintenance would it really cost? That's why I asked about the architects. It doesn't seem to me that a building should dictate education. A building is upkeep, and if your district has quit funding your building or is not prioritizing your building, then your building and the people within it are thriving and have zero of these problems and are willing to welcome more people. Why would that be considered equity? How is it considered equity to leave? There's 27 schools total. You take 9 schools, you don't touch one of them on the east bench. You make it a school, a district of 20, so we have 11 schools left in the valley. How is that equity? That's the equity questions I'm getting to. None of the things, I would agree with everything you're saying. The questions that I have are deep in the process. And how these schools that we all have are on this list, and why we're on this list, and what zip code we were in.
Sure. So let me rephrase just so the YouTube stream can capture that, and so our translators who maybe didn't hear in the back can get that too. The question is, so this individual in the community said that was her question, and she agrees with what we responded about what equity means to us in this process. But her questions are a little bit broader. She is asking about maintenance to our buildings and how that has impacted what schools are on the study list. Is that am I capturing that? Okay.
If every school on the East Bench has been built after 1999, most of which 8 of the 9 schools have all been built after 2000. So those schools, by definition of how this list was developed, would never be considered. So how is that a lens of equity?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I wasn't a member of the Boundary Options Committee, but in learning more about the work that happened there, I do know that they ran multiple scenarios. There is one spreadsheet on our website right now that you can look at. The Boundary Options Committee studied data. They met for hours and multiple times discussing amongst each other the various factors that should go into play. I do know that they ran a lot of scenarios to see which list might make sense to recommend to the board. You can see one of those examples, but in some of those other scenarios, they're probably work.
Can I open our first segment to see what other schools are
Can I jump in here real quick?
Absolutely.
We need to make sure that the questions are put down so we can answer them. This isn't to be a debate back and forth, okay? The one thing that I would like to say, though, is you're right. Buildings have been built since 2000. Auxiliary Services, which is the department I'm over now, does a 5 and 10 year plan. Every school is walked through on an annual basis with the principal, talked about what the issues are, we talk about what can be done. Then we go back and we work with the board and the rest of the administration of what are our priorities, how much money is available, and then we prioritize each of those things. There is not a school in this district that has been ignored because it's been identified as a school we want to get rid of, okay? We are following a policy. If you go on the the district website, you go to the board, under the board, there's a set of policies. We have to follow that exactly of what that is. We can't adjust it now that we've started the process, okay? So now we're learning a lot from this process. It's never perfect. This is a difficult situation. We're annotating or noting what we need to do that we'll work with when there's future situations. But the boundary committee took the G5 policy, said, okay, here are the criteria we need to follow to decide what are the right schools to address, what are the criteria to say what schools should be further assessed, okay? They did that, came back with a recommendation of here's 7 schools that we need to look at. It's been very clear that we're not saying we're gonna close 7 schools right now. We're evaluating 7 schools, okay? There's more evaluation. The purpose of that is today. And then we're going to come back to the board with recommendations of what we think is best. I think that's kind of that in a nutshell, but if there's anything else, please write it down and we'll get to the questions, but we need to move on to the next.
Thanks, Isaac. To answer your last question, we do not have partnerships with the Olympics at this time. Thanks. The next question, I will pull in Dr. Hall for this one. This person has a comment and then a question. The district past experience with moving magnet ELP programs was not ideal. And for those who aren't familiar, our magnet ELP programs are highly gifted and gifted programs for students. They were placed in schools that were hostile to the programs. It has taken over 15 years to get the programs more integrated into their neighborhood schools. How are you going to ensure a better transition if you move these programs?
That's a great question, and I wasn't here the last time we did that. I've been in the district about 10 years, and I feel like our magnet programs have integrated beautifully at this point, but I appreciate the context that it didn't start that way. I have been working with my colleague, Dr. Lisan Taylor, in school leadership and performance as we have been talking about the placement of programs as they move. And we are very cognizant of the fact that when we move a program, it needs to come into a school that has, first, enough room to house it well, and second, an administrative team with the knowledge and ability to support that program, and third, that we are able to build that sense of community between each program and the existing neighborhood school. So in the instance or in the circumstance that one of our magnet ELPs, either at Emerson or Hawthorne, moves to another school, we will work with that school and with the magnet program to bring them in and make sure that they are well integrated into the school community. We've seen some great examples from our talented administrators in the schools that currently have those magnet programs. I know that I can speak to a couple of things that are happening very specifically, for instance, at Whittier Elementary School, where the administrator and our district advanced academic specialist, Dr. Alex Parsons, sorry, is that me? Have been working to connect and, what's the word? I just lost the word. We have a collaborative kindergarten classroom where our neighborhood schools and our magnet school students are attending together in that classroom as a way of building relationships early. They also have some shared time at the library, shared time at recess, share time with projects. So we're really beginning to cross that divide of helping them integrate fully into the school. And those are the kinds of things that we would really want to plan for, not want to. Those are the things that we are planning for. So as we move a program into another school, we're connecting all of those teachers and all of those students in common planning, common activities, and common time. Because that's always a really difficult thing when a program picks up or even, new teachers come into a building. The administrator then has to create that community with the people who are new teachers, new administrators, new paraprofessionals, and new students. And the transition planning includes that look at the social and emotional aspects of creating a new culture in a school with different students, teachers, and administrators. Dr. Taylor, do you want to add anything to that? Or? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. We had a question regarding how many of those classes do we have in our district right now of one teacher at a grade level in a school, or how many schools do we have that in?
Let me read it. The question is, how many schools have the one teacher problem? How many of these are on the list of 7?
So the information that we have right now is we've gone into the further study with our October counts. We have, and off the top of my head, I don't remember the exact number of schools district-wide. We have a little more, between 30 and 32, I'm not sure on a couple, that are either one teacher at that grade level, or it's a split class where you have a third, fourth split class, and the teacher's teaching half third graders, half fourth graders, half fourth, half fifth. So we have, it's either 30, 31, 32 classrooms. When you think about that, that's like 500, 600 students. That's more than most of our, that's bigger. If you were to put all those classes into one school, that'd be our biggest, one of our biggest schools at the elementary level, if we had that. So how many different schools does that affect? We know of 1, 2, 3 of our further study schools. I believe it's 3 of those schools, not 3 or 4 of those 7 have that issue of 1, 2, up to 6 of their classroom or grade levels where there's one teacher for that grade level. So yeah, it's right around 3 or 4.
Okay, this next one is a comment. I didn't see a question on it, but I want this person to feel like they were heard and their comment was read to the community. As a community member, I'm deeply concerned by the proposition to close my neighborhood school, Riley Elementary. The fact is, residents of the West Side, and Riley's catchment in particular, face struggles that residents of more affluent areas can scarcely imagine. Among these is the reality that the school day ends much earlier than the workday, leaving parents needing opportunities for their children to safely recreate in the intervening hours. The Sorensen Center adjacent to Riley is vital for this, and with children recruited to gangs at shockingly young ages, this poses a bona fide public safety issue. Continue on the back. Additionally, it seems rather peculiar that one of the newest buildings in the district would be on the short list for closure, particularly with the area immediately south slated for redevelopment. As a graduate of top business schools in the US and the UK, I fully understand the economics considered thus far. However, it seems the calculation may quickly change. Further, as a graduate of a Title I school that was studied for closure twice during my tenure there, I know my life would look much different had my school closed. The transportation logistics would have meant fewer extracurriculars and less opportunity for advanced classes, which might have impacted my college opportunities and by extension my career. I hope the board will consider the full scope of long-term consequences when making a final decision on this matter. Thank you for that comment. Our next question, how will closing, Alan, this one will be for you. How will closing schools change the financial outcome of the Salt Lake City School District?
So let me just state, we're not closing schools because we don't have enough money to run them. What we don't have is enough students to justify them. So As our schools receive per student allocations on money, so as we have more schools or more students in a school, then there'll be more money available for that school to decide how to best manage programs in their school. The ultimate bottom line, I mean, there will be savings because if we're not heating and cooling a school, then there's those savings and those resources will be reinvested back into our educational programs.
There we go. Thank you, Alan. The next question says, will current special programs at schools that are not being considered or studied for closure possibly move if there is a boundary change and space is needed for neighborhood students versus special permits or special program attendees? I'll tackle this one and then turn to Dr. Hall if she has anything else to add. But the answer is yes. There is a possibility that a special program at a school that is not one of these 7 schools might change. There is also a very real likelihood that many of our school boundaries will change for schools that are not included in the 7 on the study list. So I appreciate this question so we can help make that a little more clear to the community. As we're looking at the district holistically, those district special programs may change location, and the goal of that is to make sure that students across the city have access to these academic opportunities. Dr. Hall, do you have anything else to add? Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question. Is the recommendation going to be just a recommendation of closure, or is it going to be a comprehensive plan with boundary adjustments, program movement, busing routes, etc.? And will it be one plan or a few plans? The answer is that when a recommendation comes to the board, it will be a comprehensive plan. It will include transition information. It will include busing routes. The transition information will be light, and we'll go more into depth on that after we know what the board will vote on. But like I said, there is a team right now dedicated to that transition planning because we know what a big deal this is. Once we do know for sure which schools might close, then our transition team will dive deeper into that to make sure that the needs of those specific communities are addressed. But it will be a recommendation that includes recommendations on boundary realignments, recommendations of which schools will close, recommendations of the possibility of relocating special programs, not necessarily, but possibly. So it will be a comprehensive plan, and it'll be one plan. And after that, more of a deep dive into the transition planning, and we'll continue to communicate with the community on that. Did I miss anything, folks? Brian?
I think the second part of that question is it going to be, bring that question back up. I think the second part.
Sorry, I just lost it. Will it be one plan or a few plans?
Yeah, so we're halfway through this study right now, the deeper dive. When we get closer, like around the 80-90%, we'll have a better answer for that. Right now, we don't know. We're still trying to get the numbers and weigh everything. Right now we're at that stage of that at the education level, you think of when you look at data, you want to look at it on the low inference. You say, what do you see? And that's what we're doing right now. What do we see? Here are all the things we see. Then we move into what do you make of it? That's the next stage before we can say what that recommendation or recommendations would look like.
Thank you, Brian. I'm going to turn this question to Dr. Buendia. The question is the policy of open enrollment at our schools going to change, or has this been added to the discussion of closures and boundary changes? Before I turn it over to her, gosh, there's feedback here. Okay, thank you. I want to explain what open enrollment is for those who might not know. In Utah, it's an open enrollment state. That means that you could go to school anywhere as long as you can get your kid there. Even if it's not your home school or your home school district, you can take your student to a different school. And in the district, we have a process for parents to apply if they want to attend a school that is not their home boundary school. So that process starts in November. Mid-November, applications open, and that process goes through the first Friday of February, where parents can ask if their child can attend a different school. By mid-March, around there is when parents usually find out whether their student can attend that school. So the question is whether that policy is going to change or if this is now part of the boundary discussion.
I'm going to try to be over here, sorry. Hopefully it won't sound as bad. So we're following protocols set forth by the state, and so the open enrollment process will not change. We are looking at setting another special enrollment period internally so that families affected by any decision made by the board have an opportunity to apply if they miss the window. But the decision will be basically made within the window. We just want to make sure we're still working out, as both Yandere and Brian have said, we're fine tuning as we're getting more and more information. And so we're trying to provide as many options and be responsive and respectful to options that parents and families are going to have. So hopefully I've answered that question.
Thank you, Dr. Buendia. Working? Okay. This next question, I will rely on the team for this one. You seem to have a plan for the right size school. What is that plan? Where will the right size school be located? New school or existing school?
So we have our historical data. We also have our October 1 data that we just got for this year. We know that people move over time, but for the most part, we know where those major concentrations of people are. We've also been working with city planners of what's being built where do we anticipate more possible growth. Can we predict out 15, 20 years? Heck no. We can look at it and say we feel really good about projections over the next handful of years. And from that, we can say, okay, here's a neighborhood, here's a school that already has in its neighborhood population 400 students. The boundaries of that school were probably going to change less than a school where the neighborhood boundary, it's like, okay, this neighborhood, the number of students in that neighborhood are 230. Well, if you only have 230 neighborhood students, those boundaries are going to have to change. So it's getting out the interactive maps, it's knowing, we know, for example, with our October 1 counts, what you saw on that interactive map from last year, we know that we have 12 students living in this neighborhood and 5 students living in this neighborhood and 10 students living in this neighborhood. And we're able to start looking at that and also look at what it's looked like in the past. What do those numbers look like in those neighborhoods in the past? And then we can say this, making the boundary grow a little bit south or a little bit north or east or west for this school makes sense, because then it captures a larger number of students so that we have a robust neighborhood population. Why are we saying somewhere around 400 to 550 for our schools? Because we know kids don't come in a neighborhood in nice, neat little packets of 25. We have some places where we have a lot more students packed into a neighborhood, other places where there's fewer. So we also have to keep in mind that we've got, in our district, 3 DLI programs, 4 gifted and talented, the ELP programs. We've got 3 hub schools. So we have those things that we also have to leave room for in 10 of our schools. We have to leave enough room that when those programs move to that school, you're not all of a sudden a school of 600, because we don't want to be bringing in portables either. We don't want to be packed to the gills. Now, there's a couple of our schools already dealing with that, that are packed to the gills. And then we have other schools, as we've talked about, that have about 200 or fewer students in them. So we're trying to balance that out. We're going to do our best with the numbers we have. As we get into this cycle of actually not ignoring this for a 20-year period, but looking at it periodically and regularly, we may end up over the course of a 20-year period adjusting boundaries here, adjusting boundaries there. There may be another school closure or two somewhere in the next 20 years. We don't know. That'll be a different school board. That'll be different. Our city will look different 20 years from now, but I doubt we're going to go another 20 years before we really dig in and do this again.
Thanks, Brian. I will also add one more thing our goal in this process is to get closer to the ideal, oh wow, that is a lot louder. To get closer to the ideal educational setting for our students. It is very likely that we will not have 100% right-sized schools because of what Brian just said, that students don't come in these neat little packages in neighborhoods across the city. The goal of this process is to get closer to that, and as we continue to review these issues over the coming years, we will get closer to that. So thank you for that question. There is a lot of talk about right-sized schools, so thanks for allowing us to explain more about what that means. This next question, Utah Code 53G-5-305 explains that the teachers and parents can vote to keep their school open as a charter school. How is the district helping parents to know that this option exists? This particular question is not my area of expertise, the legal aspect of it, but our focus is on making sure that we are serving the students who are in our district right now, that as we're looking at these 7 study schools, that we're looking to broaden access to academic opportunities, that we are serving students in better ways, that their teachers can collaborate on behalf of these kids in our city. That is where our focus is. Anything else to add from the team? Okay, next question. You have recently called out multiple schools on the closure list for exemplary educational outcomes. For example, Riley, Jackson, Wasatch. Shouldn't these schools be the schools you move kids to because they're doing something right instead of closing them? This same question applies to our other blue ribbon schools, Hawthorne, Emerson. That's a great question. The reality is that we have incredible teachers in our district. We have more national board certified teachers in the state than any other district. Not per capita, but just raw numbers, we have more of those. Our teachers are regularly finalists and awardees of national awards. We very frequently have the Utah Teacher of the Year in our schools. We recently had, or finalists, and the reality is that our students are recognized constantly. On the study list, as this person pointed out, we do have a few schools who have been recognized for their excellent academic achievement, but looking across the district, it would have been hard to come up with a list of schools where our students and our teachers had not been recognized for their academic achievements. We have great schools in our cities. That's why you're here, because you care deeply about them and you know how great our schools are. So it would have been a hard thing to do, but these things are going to continue. The teachers who are working hard to better their practice, who are working to meet their students' needs, they're going to continue to do that no matter which building they're in, and these educational practices will continue in our district. Thank you for the question.
Can I add one quick piece, that we know some of these awards are not just a reflection of the incredible teachers and administrators that we have in our schools working with great students. It's also a reflection for some of these awards of the great communities. So that will be taken into consideration. Is it the one piece that tips the scale one way or another? We don't know yet. We're in that process of further study, but those things are taken into consideration as well.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting the community. For some of these awards, like the Blue Ribbon Award, that is a big part of it. So we know we have those great communities, and we're grateful for that. This next question, I've heard a lot about the reasons for needing to close schools: changing demographics, 1 class per grade, age of building, Americans with Disabilities Act, private plus charter schools. I have not heard about what actions have been taken to attract more students to our school district and prevent closures of schools. What discussions or plans are happening to bring in programs? There's more on the back. And if aging schools is a factor, this has been a choice by the school district to not invest in those schools. How can we have confidence that there will be this investment moving forward? So Isaac stood up a little bit earlier, and feel free to pop up and add more if you have more to add here, but none of these schools was put on the list exclusively because of a building issue, and we have not neglected the maintenance in our schools, so that's not a factor that got a school onto this list, so to speak. It was a holistic process, and the district is committed to making sure that those buildings are maintained in the way that they should be. In terms of bringing students into our programs, we're so lucky to have a new superintendent, Dr. Elizabeth Grant, and her vision for our district is that we will become the flagship district in the state, that we will lead in terms of choice for students, in terms of opportunity for students, and in terms of growth. From year to year, we're going to get better, and our teachers are dedicated to improving their practice so that our students can have better outcomes. As we do that, we are going to have better outcomes and more students here in our district. Dr. Grant isn't just looking at this at the elementary level, which is what this boundary study encompasses. She's looking beyond, even beyond K-12. She's committed to building career pathways for our students, college pathways for our students, and partnering with the community, with businesses, with other organizations on behalf of our students. We had the first apprenticeship program in the state, a partnership with Stadler Rail. We are getting ready to announce that we just have the second apprenticeship program in the state, and not just the second, the only 2 apprenticeship programs in the state for our students to receive vocational training while they're in high school, to graduate with an associate's degree, to graduate ready to enter the job market if that's what they want, or if they want to continue their education, to have a job while they go to school and they're an employer who will pay for that. And as we continue to do that and build on the successes that we already have in this district, students will come. Anything else to add from the team?
This is a personal note. So I've only been with the district for a few months now, and most of my background is either in the university, higher education, or in city government, managing facilities and public works. I came here because of the opportunity, of the challenges of this school district. That was part of the reason why I was attracted to this position. The reason I share that is because, as mentioned with the buildings, they are well maintained. We do have a tight budget, but I have an amazing team with hundreds of years of experience if you add them all up. We have some of the best construction management staff in the state. When I was looking to move here, the reputation of some of our staff are statewide. People know who they are, they respect them, they respect their abilities and what they've done. As far as buildings go, education's changed, and it continues to change. So a school built even 20 years ago doesn't quite fit the model of, the next level of education. The board and the administration made some difficult decisions before I got here. A lot of these things have been ignored over the years, quite frankly. But this board and administration has been brave enough to say, okay, it's important, we've got to address this now. There was some urging that caused some of that, but I respect the decision that was made. This is a long, drawn-out process that's difficult. We're going to talk with as many community members and professionals as possible to make sure we make the right decisions. But that's just my personal ask of you guys is just, I know it's difficult, it's frustrating, there's things that you would like to see, but when you get into government of any agency, there are certain steps we have to do. Going back to G5, there are 16 steps that were set, or 16 criteria that we need to follow to do this process. If we don't follow that process, then that's what's happened at other school districts, that they didn't follow their process and the state regulations. And then that's when other unfortunate incidents have happened. So we're doing our best to follow those. I'm excited for the opportunities with the administration that we have. And we want to work with you to make sure that the education for not just the kids in the school today, but in 10, 15 years, aren't having to deal with similar situations.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Isaac, for adding that. If you have more questions, please feel free to continue to bring them up to this basket or hold them up and one of us will come get it. I'm sure you're thinking of more things as we're sitting here, so I want to encourage you to bring those questions forward because the community input part is really important to the board. The next question, are parents going to be able to participate in the transitioning committee? So the answer is that parent involvement in transition is critical. Your feedback is going to matter a lot, and our SEC chairs are going to get a little bit more information about this next month. Like I mentioned, when the vote comes from the board, after that is when we'll deep dive into transitioning. So everything's not quite laid out at the moment, but parents are going to be a critical part of that process.
I mentioned it earlier, but I want to repeat that we have asked our principals to schedule with their school community councils twice as many meetings in the spring as you normally have. If you usually do one a month, we want you to do 2 a month, with one of the 2 dedicated to whatever the transition needs to be. If you end up needing to cancel a meeting or 2, you can always do that. It's hard to add meetings if you don't know about them, but that's a real critical piece where as a parent, we want you involved. We want you talking to your principal or your school community council chair now. If you're not part of SCC, find out when those meetings are so you can attend those meetings, because those are going to be critical pieces, especially in February, March, April, and May.
Thanks, Brian. The next question, why can't we push back against the state and have smaller classrooms in some of our schools so you don't take choice to somehow give choice? So I want to clarify a point that we do have a lot of schools that are currently smaller than the ideal, but that doesn't necessarily equate to smaller classroom sizes. In fact, in many of our schools, especially when we only have 1 teacher per grade level, those classroom sizes actually tend to be larger. In our right-sized schools, we would have those smaller classroom sizes, and our district does its best to stick to that, to those more ideal ratios. It's harder when we don't have enough students to warrant a second teacher, but part of this process, the goal is to make sure that those classrooms are more manageable for teachers and for students as well. And then in terms of pushing back against the state, Jen, I'm going to ask you for clarification on what you meant by that.
So my understanding is somehow that if there's like a 25 student per teacher ratio with the state, and so we get a teacher for every 25 students or something, but that is not true. Maybe it could be explained how each student is funded, because what my understanding, I don't know this at all, moving here, with the land trust. I mean, I just opened the budget, like, that was on the website last night for activities. Our school had $156,000 or something. Some other schools had $12,000. And I'm just diving into things, and as a community, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
What does this all mean? And why is it when we know for certain that these closures affect the least advantaged, why aren't we being more careful in how we're approaching it and being more open and figuring out how to best do this? As that person wrote that letter, I'm just in tears thinking about these kids without parents, all the latchkey kids, all the stuff we've done as like educators and community, and to make sure that kids are taken care of after school, and now they're going to be like bused and maybe, I mean, it's going to look so much like just a really bad suburb, you know, and I've lived in bad suburbs, and that's what this is going to look like, and it just makes me sad.
Thank you for clarifying. I'll repeat it for the YouTube stream and for our translators. The question asker was asking about pushing back against the state and was asking what are the ratios that the state dictates for number of students in a classroom with a teacher, and further is also asking for us to explain how education is funded. And so I'm going to turn the time to our business administrator, Alan Kearsley, who manages finances for the district, to share more.
So the state funds schools with the weighted pupil unit, otherwise known as WPU. That's a certain dollar amount that each student brings with them. The dollar amount is dictated by the legislature each year. So that comes to the district in big lump sums. There is no state mandate on classroom sizes. You know, if you went down into Granite's or Jordan's, their classroom sizes are much bigger than Salt Lake's just because of the amount of students that are living in there. The allocation you hear, 25, that's a funding formula we use in the district on how we allocate full-time equivalents, FTEs, to schools. And then schools also receive discretionary money that are on a per-student basis, the land trust money, for example. And then those schools can determine on the local level how those funds are best used for their schools. Yeah, so class size, again, so when we do our estimates of what the school population or enrollment will be in a following year, we take those allocations and say, okay, school A, you get 12 full-time equivalents or 12 employees that the district will fund. And then the SIC, which is the School Improvement Council, gotta make sure I got which the C is. Yep.
I really do want to understand this. So the funding site, so then the funding calculation, I guess the way to do it is at the SCC.
Yeah, so we tell the school, here's the amount of staff you're gonna get. And then the SIC determines how they allocate those staff amongst the different grade levels. And which classes will be offered, you know, at the secondary level, talking about which courses they're gonna offer. At elementary, it's really about, you know, how do they allocate those resources or those employees to the different grade levels. And then they also, you know, their land trust money, other district money we give them if they want to supplement and hire more employees to do different things at the local level, they have that decision.
Alan, will you do me a favor and explain SCC, SIC, Land Trust, not just what the letters stand for, but what those mean, what their functions are?
That wasn't the question. So the SCC, School Community Council, that is Council of Parents is set up by state law. One of their main tasks is to determine how the school land trust funds are used at each school. The SIC is built with employees, teachers, and administration to determine how to, you know, allocate your staffing and what class offerings are going to be made.
I'll give you one real quick concrete example. After those staffing allocations are made, we've got a school next door, Mountain View. Last year, they had enough Title I money to hire 2 additional teachers to go with whatever they were allocated from the district. So they had 2 extra teachers to say, where do we need those? We had Riley, that with their Title I money could only afford 1, or you had 2 and they had 3. Whoops, sorry. They afforded 2 extra. The larger school, because they get more money because they have a higher population, they had 3. It gives you more flexibility of where you put those teachers. So you might put an extra 1 toward reading intervention, you might put an extra 1 toward 4th grade, and then an extra 1 toward 6th grade. Smaller schools don't have as many options of where to put them because they don't have as much money to hire those extras beyond the FTE.
Alan, before you answer that, Jen, these are really great questions. If you will help us out by writing these down, no, you're okay. We're grateful that you're asking these. These are really important, but if you help us by writing them down, we can capture that a little bit better. And after this one, I'm going to move on to the next question so I can make sure everybody gets their question heard. Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, I just want to remind, I mean, the decision to close schools is more about what's best for the student's educational experience versus a financial question. You know, we've talked about how one class per grade limits the choice of a student of what class they might want to be in. So it's really more about their educational opportunities and experiences over a financial issue. There are financial issues involved, efficiency of how we're spending the money, but it's really about that educational experience each student will have.
I'll add one tidbit. Our previous interim superintendent, Dr. Bates, liked to joke that if we really were looking to be efficient and that was what was guiding this, we would have one elementary school. We'd only have to pay for one principal. But of course, there's a lot more that goes into that. I also did want to clarify land trust funds. Thank you, Alan, for breaking down School Community Council and an SIC as well. The School Community Council has the opportunity to administer land trust funds. This is money that's given to schools from the state, and then the School Community Council can decide how to best use that money to support students. What I want parents to take away from that broader discussion is that your involvement really matters, that you as a parent have the ability to impact how money is spent at your school to impact your students' education. So we encourage you to get involved. Any parent can be part of the School Community Council. So keep an eye out at your school for when those meetings are, and please come. The next question. I am bothered by the lack of transparency regarding how many schools will ultimately be closed. Can you be more specific about the exact number of schools that will be closed? You have pretty granular numbers about enrollment and population projections, no? This is a really good question. The reality is there are a number of factors that go into the school closure process. This isn't just a mathematical formula. We're not churning it into a computer program and spitting back out how this is going to go. And for that reason, we can't explain a more exact number at this time. What I can say is that it won't be more than 7, and we're doing our best to balance the needs of the various communities with the factors that we need to consider that are so critical. So right now, we don't have an exact number. But we're grateful for your continued input. That is a really important part of the process. There are things, again, because this isn't a mathematical formula, there are things that we will not know unless you tell us what those things are. So thank you for being out here and telling us what those things are that we need to be taking into account. There's nothing in our formula that takes into account some of the things that you commented even today, so thank you again. The next question. Our experience with surprise increased in numbers can mean that an additional teacher is not added until the classroom size is 40. How are you going to react if student enrollment is much higher than was anticipated? How quickly are you going to react? Can you change the policy of only adding teachers with students more than 40? I'm going to look to the team on this one.
Yeah, our projections are actually on a year-by-year basis pretty close, but when they do come in and enrollment is higher, we do immediately for the next year take action to add additional staff to those schools. Is that this year? I mean, yeah, Yeah, I can't really, I'll let you recap the question.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure that our translators catch the question and that our YouTube viewers as well. The question, I'm gonna do my best to summarize, correct me if I get it wrong, but this community member, their student goes to Hawthorne, where they experienced 38 students in their child's kindergarten class, and they were told that the district couldn't hire an additional teacher until the class hit 40 students. So they're wondering, if we are off in our enrollment projections, if we restructure our school system in our elementary levels and we end up with a lot more students in a classroom than we had anticipated, how quickly are we going to pivot to add additional teachers if they are needed?
Yeah. So first, I mean, I wasn't overstaffing or anything back, and so I can't really speak to that particular situation. But we consistently get requests from the principals if their actual enrollment is coming in higher than projected of, hey, I think I'm going to have an issue, can we address it? And we immediately start looking at those issues. So we try and be very proactive on how to address an area where our projections may have been way off.
What's the number? Like, what number are you going to add to your teachers?
There is no specific number. Because again, let's say our kindergarten allocation is 1 FTE per 25. Well, at 26, I mean, we're not going to at 28, but is it maybe at 30? So it's really looking at each individual situation and talking with the principal and the staff to help determine what that's going to be.
Just to put it in some context, we do have, it certainly is a real and urgent problem when it happens in a spot. But last year, how many elementary schools were we off on our projections by more than a classroom's worth of kids, more than about 25 kids? How many schools did we have that? 2? That's what my recollection was 2 or 3 of our 27 elementaries that we weren't on with the projections within a classroom worth of students of being right on that. So when it does come up, thank you, we'll take that consideration into needing to respond more quickly.
Thank you. This next question is actually very similar. It was submitted in Spanish, so I'm going to read it in Spanish and then I'll read it in English for everyone else. Yo soy una mamá de la escuela Riley. Solo me gustaría comentar que en la clase de mi hija en 4º grado es de 33 alumnos y ella está sintiéndose un poco estresada con la cantidad de personas que hay en el salón. ¿Es posible que podamos tener otra maestra de 4º grado? I am a mother of a student at Riley Elementary School. I would just like to comment that in my daughter's class in 4th grade, there are 33 students, and she is feeling a little stressed about the number of people in her classroom. Is it possible for us to have another teacher in the 4th grade at Riley? I'm going to pass it back to our business administrator who, fun fact, also speaks Spanish.
Hablo español más o menos. Es posible que si tiene 33, pero tiene otro maestra, entonces tiene 2 clases de como 15, 16, y entonces esas clases son muy chicas. So if you took a class of 33 and added another teacher, then you end up with 2 classes of 15 and 16, and those end up being very, very small classes. Like, you do have that sweet spot of class size, and 15, 16 is getting a little small as far as interaction with other students. So sometimes in those classes that have, maybe a little more than ideal, but not enough to merit a whole nother class, we add additional paraprofessional staffing or other supports in the school to help with those situations. A veces cuando tiene un clase que es un más grande de ideal, pero no suficiente grande para otra clase, podemos tener más como paraprofessionals, otro ente en la clase para ayudarles ayudar a la maestra con las estudiantes.
Gracias, Alan. Thank you, Alan. Quiero agregar también, I'll say this in English after, que parte de la meta de este proceso es analizar y estudiar las clases en toda la ciudad. Hay 7 escuelas que se están estudiando para posiblemente cerrarlas, pero sabemos que este problema está ocurriendo en clases en varias partes de la ciudad. Cuando terminemos este proceso, la meta es que podamos tener números más ideales en cada clase para que los estudiantes puedan tener una mejor educación. Número ideal, ayúdame Alan, del kinder al tercer grado, ¿cuántos son? Ya, de kinder a 3, ¿cuántos? ¿No es 24? Disculpen, no es mi área de... Sí, no hay suficiente, lo que explicó Alan es que no hay suficiente para tener 2 maestros, pero sabemos que hay demasiado para una maestra, así que lo ideal es que ahorita, por ahora, hayan asistentes en la clase. Y me imagino que han de tener, Kesley, you probably have pairs in that class, I'm guessing. Déjeme hablarlo en inglés para que los demás entiendan también. So what I was explaining is that at the end of the process, part of what we're looking at is this exact scenario. We know that this is happening not just in this family's classroom, but across the city. We have classes where we have too many students, but we don't have quite enough to hire a second teacher. A temporary stopgap, as Alan was explaining, is that we bring in paraprofessional support to support that educator. But at the end of this process, our goal is to have closer to that ideal ratio. May not be there 100%, but our ideal is to get closer to that. And then his follow-up question was that if we're talking about ideal ratios, that his students' class is above that. And I mentioned again that that's where we bring in paraprofessional support to support in that classroom. Thank you for the question. Gracias por la pregunta. Alan, ¿tiene algo más que decir?
Also, so, we talked a little bit about what the school community councils, SCCs, and the school improvement councils, SICs, some of their job is to determine how you assign the classes. So as parents, it's a great opportunity to work with your school community to, look at how those FTE were allocated and make sure that's in the best interest of all of the grades. And I'll let you translate that one.
I'm so sorry. Can you give me a quick recap? I was reading the next question. I apologize.
Yeah, real quick recap. SIC receives the full allotment of
okay,
FTE, and then how they get assigned, how many per grade level is part of the, what's decided at the school level.
Okay.
Yeah, site
yes,
level.
thank you. En una pregunta anterior, Alan explicó el propósito del School Community Council, el School Improvement Council. Parte del papel que juegan esos grupos es ayudar a decidir, a determinar cómo se van a usar esos fondos para contratar a maestros en este grado o en otro, o proveer recursos aquí y no allá. Así que el que se involucren los padres es importante y pueden tener voz y decisión a ese nivel. Thank you. You got more?
This is a sobering reminder of why we need robust neighborhood populations. If we have enough students in a grade level, then we're assigned from the beginning more teachers, and you can balance class sizes out better. My guess is that at that particular school, there are some grade levels where there's only 17, 18, 19 students in a classroom. That doesn't balance out well. But those decisions are made, and schools have to make tough decisions to have, do we only have 18 first graders per class, or do we only have 16 fourth graders per class? Those decisions get more difficult the smaller the neighborhood population is.
Thank you. The next question, do we currently have school buildings that physically meet the requirements for a right-sized school, or will we need new buildings? I'll look to Isaac for that one. / Alan.
So all of our buildings have the capacity to be a right-sized school. So it's not about the size of the building, it's about there's not enough kids in it to fill the classrooms that are there.
Okay, we've got another question in Spanish. I'll read it in Spanish, translate in English. ¿Por qué dar permisos especiales para ir a otras escuelas y no optar por las que tenemos en nuestro vecindario? Why do we give special permits for students to attend other schools instead of opting to attend their neighborhood school? Esto es algo a nivel estatal. Por ley tenemos que ofrecer esos permisos especiales porque en Utah el estudiante puede asistir a cualquier escuela si sus padres lo pueden llevar. So one aspect of this is that this is dictated at the state level, that Utah is an open enrollment state, and so we do have to offer those open enrollment permits for students to be able to attend a different school if that's what their parents want for them. Anything else, team? Okay. Okay. It seems like a lot of data was missing before you named schools. Why did you do this? It has left parents, kids, and teachers in a constant state of uncertainty and stress. You forgot this announcement involved people. So there are a couple of things. One, this is a process. The first part of the process involved a boundary options committee studying the data that they had at that time and making a recommendation on which schools we should further study. That was not a recommendation on which schools to close. It was a recommendation, an acknowledgement on the part of that committee that, hey, these 7 schools warrant a closer look. And that's what's happening in the second part of the process right now. Further study. There are pieces of information that we don't have that we need to consult with city leaders, with state transportation officials, with community members. And the deeper study in this part of the process is really critical. So it is true that we didn't have all the data at the beginning of the process, but there was enough data to make an informed recommendation after a very comprehensive review. Also, I just want to acknowledge that we do understand that this is causing a lot of stress and anxiety for families. As Brian mentioned, our district hasn't done this in 20 years. In neighboring districts, they're used to their districts reviewing this annually or maybe every 2 years. It's just a thing that they do. Our district has not done that for a generation. I was in the K-12 system last time that happened, so it's been a minute. And we know that as we continue to study this data more regularly, we're going to avoid that for our community. And this is again where that community feedback is so important because it's been a minute since this district has done this process.
And we have gotten no further information about actually what's going to happen. Everything that's going to happen in November and December. You've made us be worried that we don't know what our kids are going to happen to them. And in the Central City, we're worried that we won't even have a neighborhood school. Because you're promising potentially that you're going to close everything between 700 East and 1300 East north of 21 South. You're saying that potentially all 4 of those schools could close, which puts us in a much more distressful situation than if you had named only one of those schools. We could have said seen an option. We could have said, yeah, my school's going to close, but I can see how I would still have a neighborhood school. You forgot there were people here.
Thank you for that question. I'm going to encourage you again, yeah, definitely. If you do have follow-up questions, to write them down just so we can capture that. And I'll repeat the questions for our translators and for our YouTube stream. This individual is pushing back on how the process went and is of the opinion that we didn't do this the right way, that we needed to have had more data before making the recommendations of which schools to study. I'm going to let Dr. Buendia take a stab and then I might follow up.
So, and I say this in full recognition, and trust me, all of us, are feeling anxiety, probably not the same anxiety as you all who are directly impacted by this. And so what I want to say is that we as a district entity have followed board policy and board procedures for how to engage in this process. And so one of the things that we're learning from it is, hopefully, when we debrief and we're having conversations along the way, how can we do it better? And so we can't fix what we probably and may have gotten wrong or in terms of procedure, but we are following the procedures outlined in the administrative procedures. That's what we're doing. So we're not steering away from it, and we're taking your feedback, and we know the anxiety. If at this point we said to you, we know we're going to close 10 schools, 7 schools, 5 schools, 4 schools, then that demonstrates a bias. We don't know until we take a look at the data. We won't know until we look at the data. That first phase took, they really were looking at, of the 27, clearly it wasn't gonna be 27. How many? It came down to 7. And unfortunately, it came down to 7 of the schools being the schools that you are strongly advocating for, as well as you should. And we appreciate it. I know it probably feels like we're not listening and don't appreciate it. We do. So now we cannot say we know for a fact it's going to be 1 or it's going to be 7. We have the conversation. Is there anything obvious, like a clear split as we're looking at the data? It's not working out, at least at this point, at that level. So we are looking, and we are taking, we have notes where everybody who's involved, and you heard district leadership, that includes us, we're looking at your feedback, we listen to you, we're talking about the anxiety, we're talking about the traffic, we're talking about all of that. So know that if we could definitively say to you, it's 4 schools, we would by now. We're just unable to.
Hi. So I also just want to point out that our administrative procedures that we've been talking about today were designed around state law in terms of requiring no decision to be made until after we've had our 2 official public comments in open board meeting and our 1 public hearing. So that limits our ability to indicate what schools we would be closing. And also, just our process is very similar to all other school districts' closure or boundary adjustment processes because it follows state law. The board, when we created this administrative procedures, were very cognizant of all the concerns that had been raised in our prior 2 closures that were most recent, and so we really wanted to address those concerns when we were creating this. So we added in a lot of aspects that had been raised in those public comments. And these administrative procedures are always very fluid. And so after we're finished with this process, we're going to take all the feedback and comments we've gotten about this and look at how we can make this process better. But definitely, when we created this process, it was aligned with state law. It currently aligns with state law, and it very much aligns with what other school districts are doing. So that's just what I wanted to add.
Okay, making sure he wasn't going to add anything. Thank you for that question. I'll add one last thing. We can't go back and do differently the first part since this is where we are now, but if there are things as a parent that you're seeing that we can be doing that would make the rest of this easier, will you let us know what those are? Okay, great. We appreciate that feedback. Those things really are taken into account, so thank you for speaking up. Okay, the next question. Thank you for sharing the commitment of this administration to growth and making Salt Lake City School District the district of choice. This process was kicked off under the interim superintendent. Why was this not paused until this administration could establish their leadership and choose the best path forward? How did we allow this to get kicked off under an interim administrator? That is a great question. For those who have been, glued to board meetings for the past 5 years, every one of you, right? There have actually been several times over the last half decade where the possibility of school closures was brought up. About 5 years ago, the superintendent at that time brought up Benyon Elementary as maybe needing to be studied for closure. The board didn't take action on that recommendation. When we had our last non-interim superintendent, he brought up in board meeting the possibility of school closures. At that time, that superintendent asked for the process to be delayed a year so that we could have board elections. We had turnover in our board, and we thought it would be best for the same board members to be here for the whole process, since at the end of the day, they're the ones who will make the final decision and vote on this issue. The process had been kicked down the road, so to speak, so much that it was needed at that time. It's been needed for a while, and the interim superintendent who started that process is a seasoned veteran, former superintendent of Granite School District, community member. And in terms of what that means for us going forward, the process is what we're sticking to. The process that our general counsel referenced is still the same. That board policy is what we're sticking to, and while it did start under different leadership in a different administration, it is still continuing, and we'll see it through to the end. Anything to add from the team? Okay, thank you. Okay, here we go. Can you comment on how employees, for example, hourly contract administrators, will be moved if their current school closes? Sorry, I thought I heard a whisper from me. So right now, we are in the process of working out those details. There is a team working on transition, but that's not finalized quite yet. Our overarching goal is to minimize any reduction in force because, as I mentioned before, we have high-quality employees. We value them, and we want to make sure we keep as many of them as we can. Did you have anything else you wanted to add? Okay, we're good. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Oh, you know what? Oh, I got one more. All right, this is our last question, or I guess I'll do one last call if anybody else wants to send something up. Following the state processes, when state process is biased, what about excellence and equity? Sorry, was there?
I was just going back to, I forget what the attorney's name is, I'm so sorry, but she had mentioned that, that you guys are following all of these processes, the streetlight process and everything with the rest of the state, when we know that there has to be some kind of bias when the outcome is these 7 schools. And what I want to know is how we're going to stop making all of us feel like we're constantly targets and not coming together and making this, putting us and just saying, I'm doing policy because this is what policy is. I'm only giving teachers here, at this school, you can get a teacher at 40 students, this one is at 35. It's like you're asking us all to be accountants and administrators and come to these SEC meetings and be, involved in ways that it's just not very realistic for most of us that are working.
So to recap, the question is why are we following the state process? It's why are we following when the state process is biased, right? Okay. The reality is that we are bound by state law. We are a government entity. We're funded by taxpayer dollars, but we're down here. State's above us, and so we are subject to follow what is in state code, for better or for worse. Brian, were you going to add something?
Just that we want to acknowledge how difficult this is. This isn't an equation that has a simple answer. We will, whether some in the end view it as a bias or judgment based on all the evidence we could collect, we ultimately don't have the control on that. All we can try to do is continue to try to develop understanding of how the process works, and come back to what we really think as a district, what is important in our district is that something needs to be done. We've had 20 years of doing nothing, and 18 years ago, it wasn't that big a deal. Our class sizes in our schools were more robust. We had more students living in our neighborhoods. Probably wasn't an urgency 18 years ago. 15 years ago, it grew a little. 10 years ago, it grew more. 5 years ago, it grew a lot. It's a shame that we had to wait till now for a courageous a group of board members to say we're going to tackle this. We have a courageous superintendent who accepted a job coming into this partway through the process. We believe that it's going to, in 2-3 years, we're going to be in a better spot than we are right now. This is one of those steps that we use to build a solid foundational piece so we can move on with the work of excellence and equity in the schools that we have.
Thank you, Brian. I found one more card I hadn't read, so this is the actual last question, unless there are no more. Why are we not ensuring a district person or something at each school community council meeting? Or are working parents also supposed to do accounting for the district? So our Director of Boundaries and Planning, Brian Conley, is actually meeting with every school community council for the 7 schools that are on the study list. In the spring, he met with every elementary school community council. And in terms of working parents, that's why we're providing these meetings at such varied times. A Saturday morning at 9 o'clock isn't a typical time where we'd have a school district event, but we know that many of you work, you have other obligations, many of you work multiple jobs, and we wanted to provide a variety of ways in which you could be part of the process. There's a form to comment online. The meetings are live streamed. We have translation. We have 3 more meetings that we're going to be holding, and we also spread them out in different parts of the city. I see our superintendent coming up here, and I'm guessing you want the mic.
I want to mention also that I have a representative from the district in every school. The school principal is a representative of the district. Is our person in that school representing the district interests as well as the interests of parents and teachers, so that in those community council meetings, in those school improvement council meetings, there is representation from the district, as well as recognition that we have somebody there who knows the context and the people within that building.
Thank you, Superintendent. And thank you for your questions. I'm just going to do one more check that nobody has a slip of paper for me. We're good? Okay. Thank you so much. We appreciate you being here. We invite you to continue to stay engaged with us, and we'll be around if you have other questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.